Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I got a couple bins that I was going to feed. And like I do sometimes, I grab my little scratch board here to put some notes down about these bins to share the information with you. And I realized that I haven't really used this board since the last time we actually fed these two bins. And they're the bins of A and C's. Those are the African nightcrawlers that I've got that came from NE worms, northeast worms. And the two bins were last fed 10 days ago, so I think we could just take the information that's already here on this board and update it. So it was 10 days since those bins were last fed, and these feed counts were really from the previous feeding, so just add one, right? So the older bin has received thus far 11 feedings, and the younger bin has thus far really received 4 feedings. And at this point, 10 days later, the older one is 87 days of age, and the younger one is 41 days of age. So I was going to put my glove on and get to work on feeding these bins, but I just figured I'd provide a little bit of background information for what's up with these bins, as far as their age and the number of feedings they've received and how much time has passed since we last checked in on them and so on and so forth. But why don't I get one of those bins up here and we'll get to work on them and we'll get these guys fed. I'm so sorry. There were 2 numbers here on this board that I forgot to make mention of what they stand for. And it's the worm count, how many worms we believe are in each system. So here in the younger bin, the 41-day-old system, we have a fairly accurate count of how many worms we placed in here because we extracted these 228 or so worms from the older bin on 2 occasions, and on each occasion taking great care in counting how many worms we were moving into this bin at a time. I believe it was about 130 or 129 worms on the first go around, and then something like 98 worms on the second go around. But the bottom line is that, we have a pretty high degree of confidence in the population of this little container here, the newer of the 2 bins. On the older one, I was originally given the worms with the estimate of there being 500 worms in there, but then I was also told lots of cocoons, lots of babies, so that number is probably going to grow, and I believe it certainly has, because if we really took 500 and deducted 228, then we'd have only 274, and I've got a feeling that there's a great deal more worms in the larger, older container. So we'll start here in the younger of the 2. They're in a slightly smaller box than I usually run my worm bins in, and I've been promising to get these little guys relocated into a larger space, and I will do that soon, but I'm not going to do it today. I just got back from being out of town for 4 days straight, so I've only been home for a little while, and a lot of times I'll review the videos from previous go-arounds and refresh my memory on what happened in the bin in the prior check-in and stuff like that, so I've given myself none of that prep today. I was just really lucky to have that board with all the information already on it that I could just grab and go. So I don't remember what we fed in here. We may or may not be given a reminder of what we fed last time once we check the feeding area, because some foods leave traces behind or are slow to compost and there's leftovers. Other foods are gone within days, no sign of it. So we'll probably know better once we check. These little chubby worms. A little bit chubbier than the worms I've typically used in my wormery. I've typically used red wigglers going back a few years, and it was just later when I started to get into European nightcrawlers, African nightcrawlers. But it always seemed to me like my nightcrawlers were a little puny in size. So it was kind of cool when Gaetano over at Northeast Worms offered up some of his nice big fat well-fed African nightcrawlers. I mean, he didn't necessarily say here's some nightcrawlers. He actually said, let me know if you want some worms. If you do, just let me know what kind, and so he made it really easy. Super friendly dude. Awesome customer service. Great customer experience, I mean, super fast shipping. The worms are taken great care of. You get tracking. mean, the packaging even says, you know, hey, don't leave these little guys out in the sun. Don't give them to the postal carrier to walk around and deliver it. You know, keep it at the post office where the climate's controlled, so that if it's too hot, too cold, you're not going to end up killing the contents of the container. It seems like the worms have done a really nice job chewing up whatever it is that we gave them to eat last time. The only thing I've recognized so far was a banana stem somewhere. I don't even know what I did with it. I think I just sort of blew by it. I think I was distracted because while I had the banana stem in my hand, I was thinking about what I was seeing. I thought I saw a lot of worms cruising around in here, and I think I even felt some of them as I was kind of probing around in there. And they're all over the place. And since this bin is 40 some odd days old, you got to think, you know, hey, some of that original 129 worms that came out of here when this bin was first launched back then could have already started depositing cocoons and starting off the next generation. And then later, you know, we added more worms, another batch of 100 worms later. But after 41 days, ooh, banana stem. After 41 days, there's a good likelihood that some cocoons have been placed in here. Whether there's been sufficient time for those cocoons to hatch or not, I don't know. And even if they did, I would have to imagine that the baby worms would still be very small in size and hard to see. So I think that's the main reason we're seeing mainly, you know, good-sized worms. When I recruited worms to move them out of the old bin and start off this new adult-only bin, I wasn't that picky, you know. If I saw pretty much any old worm, I grabbed it. I wasn't going to try to, like, you know, examine each one individually close up to see if it's an adult or young or check its ID. So I just grabbed any old worms and brought them over here. So either way, you know, even if they're not adults yet, they will be soon. And it'll just be interesting to see how that older bin gradually starts to grow in population because of all of the cocoons that were in there. And I've already seen evidence of it, definitely. That bin just seems like the population has grown a bunch lately. So this is my pre-made bedding over here. It looks a lot like what you already saw in here. It's what I built the bin out of originally. And it's shredded newspaper, shredded cardboard, some leaves mixed in, and moisture, obviously, getting this stuff all nice and damp and soaked for weeks now. And then I took a handful of finished castings and threw that in here too, so that hopefully whatever sort of microscopic life is living on or in those castings, they'd be able to kind of take a foothold and you know, sort of prime this bedding so that it's not completely sterile and free of life, that it's already got some of that really good beneficial bacteria and microbes and everything else floating around it in there already. So now is the time for me to go head upstairs. Since I didn't come down here prepared with food, I gotta go fetch some stuff to give these little guys. And since both bins were probably fed very similarly, I would have to assume, since no leftovers were found here, and since we think the other bins got a larger population, there'll be no leftovers left over there either. So I'll bring down a nice little feeding for these two bins here. So break time, and I'll be right back. So what you see here is what they're going to be fed. It's a whole bunch of leafy stuff. I'm not even sure what it is. I think it came from my mom's, because I don't recognize it. Maybe it's like the leaves of radishes or something. As you work your way around, you see some other things that you'll probably recognize already. These are the peels of some bananas. There's also the filters from a couple days worth of coffee, although just the coffee from one day's worth of filter. This filter's empty. I got a used napkin here. So we're going to apply today's feeding on top of this healthy dose of bedding. You know, these are night crawlers, African night crawlers, which a lot of people will tell you will probably prefer the bedding as a meal over the kitchen scraps. I don't know, they seem to have done a really nice job polishing off what they got last time, whatever it was. Kind of makes me curious now. I'm going to have to check out the video from last week to see what it was that I fed them. But it couldn't have been anything that takes a long time to break down because I didn't see any leftovers. Well, I think, yeah, there was that little chunk of banana peel, so maybe that was about it. The banana peel stem is apparently the last to go. I guess that's the toughest part of the whole banana peel. This little flower end seems to go pretty quick. The rest of this all goes. And obviously, if there's any banana left inside, maybe bruised or for whatever reason didn't get eaten, dropped on the ground, then that's usually the first to go. Now, I've got other bedding to give them, since there's that other filter over there that we can give to the other bin. We'll give them this one, but you know what? The feeding zone indicator that we had resting on top to show ourselves where we had last fed was pretty beaten up. It was torn in half, as a matter of fact. So why don't we save the good one to become our new feeding zone indicator and use this one as surplus bedding in the bin. Seems like a smart move. And then we could start giving them a little bit more food. But I don't know if the banana peels would have needed it, but whether or not they needed it, they're just going to get a little bit of this crushed eggshell, which is the form of grit that I use in my bins. And now, this leafy stuff, I don't know, to me it always seems like this leafy stuff is really super fast to get eaten by the worms. It seems like if I kind of just pour out all the broken up stuff, this chunk that's still frozen that is one piece appears to be about half. So we've done a pretty good share of the portion, I think. Although maybe this frozen chunk here can go back, because I believe there is a greater number of worms in the other bin. For that same reason, I guess we'll give these guys a little bit of coffee, but just a bit, and we'll save the majority of the remainder of the coffee for the other, what I believe to be more populated bin. Let's blend in this coffee with all these veggies, and it'll make for a real nice mix. Maybe even just another sprinkle of grit, make it extra nice. So the only other thing that I had down here that I was looking to compost as part of this feeding is this soiled napkin. So we'll give them half of this too, and we'll be able to move on to get the other bin fed. I would think that this stuff's going to go pretty quick too. So we'll just stuff it all in there and start to cover up. I guess while I'm doing that, I might as well, in that same motion, sort of take a little peek over on this edge, maybe on this edge too, because we went straight for the middle. Didn't really check the edge. Let's get this mango seed back down where all the fun is going to be, where all the feeding and eating is going to be. That was, I don't even know if that was part of the last feeding or that goes back a few feedings, but mango seeds will always take a good amount of time. You always kind of lose track of when you put the mango seed in, because it's months and months later and it's still one piece sometimes. So yeah, things look pretty good over there. I guess we just had the mango seed was thrown over there, so I'm glad I was able to get that back down into the middle of the feeding area. Once again, maybe in another sort of felt swoop in the process of covering up the feeding, we could take a peek under here. Here it looks like maybe just a little bit more moisture than we saw. What appears to be another banana stem. This one's got to go back a number of feedings at this point, because look, it just like shreds in my hands into these little fibers. Very often you'll find a worm burrowed right down inside of one of these things. So it's making good progress. I guess this feels like a good thing to do what we're doing here anyway too, because some of this dry stuff that was bordering the contents of the bin can get bought a little bit more inboard and be maybe a little bit better protected from the drying effects of the evaporation. So I think we've more or less covered up our feeding here pretty nicely. This bin is I don't know, it seems like it's filling up pretty good, you know. I mean, like I'm definitely not at capacity, but I do like to steer clear of getting right up to the rim. If I had nothing else to put them into, I probably would want to reserve about this much room so I can work in here and not just keep stacking it up higher and higher. But then again, you know, if you look at how much stuff in here still needs to be broken down, I bet you if this were all castings, or if this was all eaten already and turned to castings, we'd be looking at a much, much shallower bin here. So, all right, enough chit-chat. Let's get this system covered up here, more or less the way we found it. Except I do have this nice new coffee filter that we can use to mark where we fed. Kind of silly, just a tradition of mine though. It's pretty obvious where we fed. It's where that big pile in the middle is. Alright, looking forward to seeing how the adult bin's coming along. And yeah, that was kind of a nice mix actually, right? With moisture underneath the plastic, but just enough dry stuff to keep everything kind of nice and loose and airy. So yeah, I like how this bin's coming along. Let's move on to the other one and get them fed too. As you can see, the adult bin is sporting a sticker from Northeast Worms. Since this is the bin that the adult worms were placed into, the ones that I received from them. So it's kind of a cool sticker too, so I figured I'd use it. So here, well, you know, like I said, I think we got a lot more worms in here. And like I said earlier, since this was kind of like a larger bin in the making, so to speak, since it had a lot of sort of future worms in it as opposed to presently present worms. It's a little abstract there, right? So, but if you're following along, then you know what I'm talking about. It basically means that with a bunch of cocoons, a bunch of babies that you might not be able to see off the start, you know that in a short period of time, all that's going to turn into adult worms too. So, whoa, that was interesting. I just pulled off this feeding zone indicator, and I saw something here that I never ever see. It just looks like a big varmint hole, you know, like a big something burrowed a hole in there or something. But I mean, I don't see any other signs of something that would have burrowed in here. I just hope it's a cavity that occurred maybe because the top surface was somehow, or maybe just because it got eaten so quickly or something, but I don't know if you're able to see that. This is such a weird hole. I mean, it goes down this far and it like spreads out in all these different directions. Weird. So I guess just the little bit of dryness on the top is holding all the material together just enough to not let it collapse, so that it's sort of suspended over where the last feeding was placed. And we know where the last feeding was because the coffee filter was there. No, obviously, you know, usually there's other telltales of where the last feeding was, so usually you don't need a feeding zone indicator. Like I said, I just do it out of tradition. I don't know why. Look at that huge stem. So far, I've not even seen one worm. That's really weird. But a lot of times, that's when I end up finding the most. It's just this weird white stuff I'm looking at, almost like if it was like a fungus or roots or who knows what it is. Kind of cool looking though. Maybe it's like a mold or whatever. So I'm curious to see if we could find any leftovers in this one. It seems unlikely, very unlikely, I think, actually. Unless there's a mango seed in here too. It's so nice to have this much more room. You kind of, I guess you don't appreciate it until you just finish working in a puny little tiny bin, and then you get into your larger bin and it's like, oh, so much more room, so much easier to work around in here. Although my bins aren't really that big, as you can see, you know. Certainly nothing compared to some of the bins you see on some of these other worm channels. But you know, even when one of these bus boxes or bus bins gets filled up, it's heavy. And I don't think I'd want anything with a greater capacity just because it would become so heavy. I know that the mango seed in the other bin had a good number of worms hanging out on it, but this one doesn't seem to even have one. Funny thing in here is that I'm definitely, this is weird because when we went into the other one, it just had very large worms everywhere. I kind of explained why. But here, so far, the only stuff I'm seeing is little puny ones. I guess that must mean I did a really good job plucking the adult worms out of here and relocating them. But I think I do probably need to do a couple more rounds of that. Or I don't know if it's just sort of a, yeah, I mean, it almost seems like a perpetual cycle in a way, you know, unless you can keep the population young enough by removing all the adults regularly enough that they just don't meet up, you know, like there's just not enough worms of breeding age around to find each other and mate. I mean, I'm sure it occurs a little bit here and there, but if you keep pulling the worms out that are of mating age, then the remaining little tiny baby hungry worms are going to focus more on eating and not reproducing, maybe. Here's another banana stem, very far along, just like the one we looked at earlier. It's interesting. It almost felt like I was ripping open like a chicken leg or something with a bone inside. Because that little hunk of fibers in the middle is just, oh, there we go, a little worm hanging out inside. Where'd he come from? That was kind of cool. So that was kind of weird, opening up a banana stem and first thinking that you're looking at a bone rather than a piece of fruit, then having a little worm jump out at you. But yeah, let's just, I'm just curious, so let's go down. Oh, it's so much deeper than the other one too. It's nice to be able to pour through a good sized bin. Man, you know, I do believe that the next time we go through here, it's probably going to be another adult removal session. And then in that 41-day-old bin, I wonder how long do I keep them in there? You know, because they're going to be dropping cocoons left and right in there, I'm sure. So it'd be nice to clear them all out before those babies start emerging. Obviously, that was the whole reason for pulling them out of here. Keep the adults separated from the babies, retain their large size by doing so. Because that is the objective ultimately for doing that, from what I understand, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. But here too, man, I've just been so generous with the bedding that I feel like I'm running myself out of space. I'm already up at the very rim of this thing, and it kind of just makes me nervous, you know, because it just feels like something could get knocked over pretty readily and be all over the floor, making a mess. And I really try my best to not make a big cleanup job for myself after one of these feeding sessions. It should be pretty straightforward. Almost treat it as like a household appliance in a way. It's just like an alternative to chucking stuff in the trash. I'm sure a lot of people see it that way, but I just can't seem to help myself in terms of just kind of getting a little bit more into it than probably others do. All right, I think we've created ourselves a large enough void down here to apply today's feeding. We're going to have to probably get these mango seeds back down there too. Other than the mango seeds, on the banana stem, I don't think I saw any leftovers in here either. This makes me curious, makes me want to go review last week's, or the last feeding from 10 days ago. To refresh my memory on what these guys got last time, because there's very little sign of anything in here. So this feeding seems pretty timely. Oh, it feels so good having all this really nice prepped bedding. It's all damp, and I know it's already creeping with microbes, and even the leaves that were mixed into it have had a chance just from the moisture to get soft a little bit, you know, a little head start on getting broken down. And the freezing too, I think, such a simple step to help the materials break down quicker. Man, that other one, when it was still frozen, just broke apart into little chips, 1, 2, 3, and this one was thawed out just enough to make it difficult to snap the pieces into little chunks. So doing my best to tear it up into small pieces, spread it out, but it's not so important, doesn't matter. All right, so what do we do here? Do we recycle the old feeding zone indicator and use this one as a fresh new replacement? We could, you know, because this piece of paper probably wouldn't be so interesting to the worms as far as a piece of bedding that you would also want to kind of chew on, but this one that's been in the bin for who knows how long, it's probably a nice tasty accompaniment to the feeding. So let's do that. Even though it's dry, it's well, I'm sure it's not completely dry. It probably just dried out from being out here in the air for a few minutes, but I'm sure it's teeming with a lot more, you know, microscopic life and activity than this one up here, the one that just came from the kitchen. So let's see how much we left for these guys. I think I made it a pretty fair split, or maybe even left a little bit more for these, since I expect that they're a little bit larger as far as the worm count goes in here. This is definitely more stuff from what I can tell. But even though it looks like a lot, every time I give worms this sort of stuff, they just gobble it up, 1, 2, 3. I think all having been frozen, once it thaws out, it just becomes mush. So we'll see no signs of this in a short time. Alright, it's kind of cool that I've got a napkin here as part of the stuff I'm using as bedding. Get a little head start on cleaning off my glove. But it makes sense, right? Why drain it down? Why rinse it down the drain when all this yummy stuff on my hands can be worm food instead? Well, this is a pretty fun bin. Definitely looks pretty busy. I think you would have to agree that it's probably got a lot more worms in it than the numbers that I had down there. Like I said, the numbers were all just stemmed off of 500 and what was known to be the amount removed. So the actual population of this system is anyone's guess. So we've put in food, we've put in grit. I guess the one thing I like to do with the coffee nowadays is sort of help blend it in or whatever. But I guess the main objective is just not to have a big lump of it, you know, sitting in a corner that the worms can't really take advantage of. To me, it seems like coffee blended in is coffee that's going to get much more quickly and readily eaten by the worms. Okay. Worms here, worms there, worms everywhere. So the material on the top is a little bit drier. You might have noticed when we were covered up, we had paper and cardboard, but no plastic here, not like on the other one. I might end up removing plastic from that bin soon. So I usually run plastic in just my my younger systems where I've got a lot of materials making up the bin that probably can't really hold on to their own moisture very well. But a system like this will have already graduated to the point where we're not helping it hang on to its moisture. It just it hangs on to its moisture because it's worm castings, because that's really just what that stuff does. It does a great job of it too. I mean, I must admit it is a little bit dry down here along the edges. I might have even toyed with the prospect of putting plastic out on top of this bin again, just because, you know, material like this that is a bit dry and you don't see worms cruising through it isn't being broken down, you know, and that's really what I'm after. So I don't want to just have them working on a tight little focus spot that gets moisture from, you know, the decomposing foods only. I really like the worms to be kind of free to roam the entire bin. It's for that reason I think restoring plastic coverings to this bin is probably a pretty good idea. Got to get this stuff damp again. You know, luckily there was a good large section of the bin down the middle where the feedings had been applied, and you know, it was damp and cozy for them there, so there wasn't any sort of reason to be worried for them. But it's more about, you know, making sure that the stuff that you want to have the worms eat and break down is, you know, set up properly so that they will do just that with it. So now it's kind of my trademark gaffe to always forget something, forget the coffee, forget the whatever, forget the this, forget that. But I had this nasty looking napkin over here that we had already promised to the worms, you know. I mean, if they heard us talking about how they were going to get this thing, and some of them were already looking forward to it, it would be awfully disappointing not to give it to them, right? So let's be cool and let's just give them what they were promised, right? And then in can come the nice new fresh coffee filter to cover up with at the end. Show us where we last fed, which is down the middle, obviously. And I've definitely been thinking of kind of changing up my feeding patterns a little bit. I did have a lot of fun when I was sort of doing that pocket feeding approach, moving the feeding from corner to corner to corner in a counterclockwise rotation in all my bins for a while. It was always kind of cool because you can go back to the previous feeding and see how that food's coming along, and then check the other pocket, see how the food that's even older than that's doing, going back even further. It's like a little worm bin time machine. All right, everyone, that's it for today. We've got our Northeast Worms African nightcrawlers fed. They're doing a great job, I gotta say. Both bins look awesome. But before we put things away, we've got to give this bin a little bit of protection from further drying so that it can hold on to that nice moisture that went in there with all those little leaves that we threw in there. I would imagine that as that stuff all begins to thaw out, it's gonna dampen everything around it. The coffee we threw in there was pretty dry, that's true. But the bedding we used, that had some dampness to it as well. We could always add moisture, but I'd like to think that there's already enough in there. It just needs to sort of spread out and be shared amongst all the materials that are in there, so I don't want to swamp the bin. It wouldn't be a big deal, and you know, admittedly I have been adding moisture to some of my bins, but I think here we're just going to experiment with the idea of going with what's in there already and just using the plastic, try to help it all equalize. I got a feeling that this piece of newspaper right here, once it starts getting really damp from all the moisture recirculating beneath the bubble wrap, it's going to become a really popular spot for the worms to hang out at. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.